The mind-body problem stands as one of the most enduring puzzles in the history of philosophy. At its core lies a simple question with profound implications. What is the relationship between mental phenomena and physical phenomena, between thoughts and brain processes, between consciousness and matter? This question has occupied philosophers for more than 2,000 years, and despite centuries of careful thinking and, in modern times, extensive scientific investigation, the relationship between mind and body remains mysterious in important ways. The problem arises because mental and physical phenomena seem fundamentally different in nature. Mental events like thoughts, feelings, and sensations have a subjective character. When someone experiences pain or sees the color red or thinks about Paris, there is something it is like to have that experience, a qualitative feel that is known directly and immediately to the person having it. But physical events, the movements of particles and the flow of energy through matter, do not seem to have this subjective character. A brain process, viewed from the outside through scientific instruments, appears as patterns of electrical and chemical activity. Where in these objective physical patterns is the subjective feeling of pain or the perceived redness of red? The differences extend further. Mental states seem to have intentionality, meaning they are about things, they represent things, they refer to things beyond themselves. A thought about Paris is about that city, refers to it, means it. But physical states are not inherently about anything. A pattern of neural firing is simply a pattern of neural firing. It does not, in itself, refer to anything or mean anything. Any meaning it has must come from its relationship to other things, from interpretation, from context. Mental states also seem private in a way that physical states are not. No one else can directly experience your pain or your thoughts. They can only infer them from your behavior or your reports. But physical states, at least in principle, are publicly observable. Multiple people can look at the same brain scan, measure the same neural activity, observe the same physical processes. Given these profound differences, the question becomes how mental and physical phenomena relate to each other. They clearly do relate. Mental events seem to cause physical events. When someone decides to raise their arm rises. The decision, a mental event, appears to cause the movement, a physical event, and physical events seem to cause mental events. When light of a certain wavelength strikes the retina, triggering a cascade of neural activity, the person sees red. The physical processes appear to cause the mental experience. But how is this causal interaction possible if mental and physical phenomena are so different in nature? This is the heart of the mind-body problem. Different philosophical traditions have offered different solutions to this puzzle. In ancient Greece, Aristotle developed an account of the relationship between soul and body that avoided treating them as separate substances requiring connection. For Aristotle, living things were unified substances, not composites of distinct mental and physical parts. The soul, in his view, was the form of the living body, the principle that organized matter into a living being, capable of the activities characteristic of life. Just as the shape of an axe blade is what makes a piece of metal into an axe, capable of cutting, so the soul is what makes a living body alive, capable of nutrition, growth, sensation, movement, and in the case of humans, rational thought. This might sound abstract, but Aristotle's key insight was that form and matter are not two separate things that need to be connected. They are rather two aspects or principles of a single unified thing. The form is the structure or organization that makes the matter into the particular kind of thing it is. The matter is the stuff that takes on that form and structure. They exist together, inseparably, in the concrete individual substance. So for Aristotle, a human being is not a soul somehow connected to or residing in a body. A human being is a living body, a unified organism whose soul is simply its form, its principle of organization and activity. This Aristotelian approach has certain advantages. It does not create the problem of explaining how two radically different substances interact, because it does not treat soul and body as two different substances in the first place. Mental activities like perceiving and thinking are activities of the whole living organism, not of some immaterial ghost residing inside a physical machine. When a person thinks, it is not some non-physical mind doing the thinking while the body stands by passively. It is the person, the living human animal, exercising their rational capacities, engaging in an activity that involves their entire organized being. But this view also raises questions. If the soul is inseparable from the body, merely its form or organizing principle, then what happens when the body dies and its organization dissolves? Does the soul perish with it? Aristotle's own views on this matter are complex and have been debated by scholars for centuries. He seems to have thought that individual human souls do not continue after bodily death, though he sometimes suggested that there might be some aspect of intellect that is separable and eternal. For many later religious thinkers, particularly in the Christian tradition, this was unsatisfactory. The doctrine of personal immortality required that the soul be something capable of existing apart from the body, at least temporarily, until the resurrection. This theological commitment led many medieval and early modern philosophers to reject or significantly modify the Aristotelian account. The view that would come to dominate much of Western philosophy, particularly after the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries, was substance dualism. This position was most influentially articulated by René Descartes, though it had roots in earlier philosophical and religious thought. Descartes argued that reality consists of two fundamentally different kinds of substance. On one hand, there is mental substance, or thinking substance, which Descartes called res cogitans. This substance is characterized essentially by consciousness and thought. It does not occupy space, has no physical dimensions, cannot be divided into parts. On the other hand, there is physical substance, or extended substance, which Descartes called res extensa. This substance is characterized essentially by extension in space, by having length, width, and height. It is unconscious, lacks any inner subjective experience, can be divided indefinitely into smaller parts. According to Descartes, a human being consists of both kinds of substance. The mind is an immaterial thinking substance, the seat of consciousness, awareness, and rational thought. The body is a material extended substance, a complex biological machine that operates according to mechanical principles. These two substances, mind and body, are intimately connected during a person's earthly life, interacting in ways that produce the unified experience of being a conscious embodied agent. But they are nonetheless distinct substances, capable in principle of existing separately. The mind could exist without the body, which is how Descartes understood the state of the soul after death, and the body could exist without the mind, as a corpse does, though it would no longer be truly alive, merely a mechanical system that has ceased functioning. This Cartesian dualism has a certain intuitive appeal. It captures our sense that mental life is somehow different from physical existence, that consciousness is not just another material process. It preserves the possibility of personal survival after bodily death. It seems to respect both the subjective reality of conscious experience and the objective reality of the physical world. But it also creates a severe problem, one that Descartes himself recognized and struggled to address. If mind and body are completely different kinds of substance, sharing no properties in common, how can they interact? How can a thought which has no physical properties cause a bodily movement? How can a physical event in the nervous system cause a mental sensation? Descartes proposed that the interaction occurred in a specific location in the brain, the pineal gland. He chose this gland partly because it appeared to be the only part of the brain that was not duplicated on both sides. His idea was that the immaterial soul acted directly on this physical gland, causing it to move in subtle ways, and these movements were then transmitted through the nervous system to the muscles, producing bodily actions. Conversely, physical stimuli from the sense organs were transmitted to the pineal gland, where they affected the soul and produced sensations and perceptions. But while this proposal located a specific site of interaction, it did not really solve the problem. It merely relocated it. The fundamental question remained: how does an immaterial substance with no physical properties whatsoever cause movement in a material gland? What is the mechanism of this causation? And if no mechanism can be specified, if the interaction simply happens without any intelligible explanation, then has the problem really been solved at all? This interaction problem proved to be the most serious difficulty facing Cartesian dualism. It led some of Descartes' contemporaries and successors to propose alternative accounts that avoided positing direct causal interaction between mind and body. One such account was occasionalism, developed by philosophers like Nicolas Malebranche. According to occasionalism, mental and physical events do not actually cause each other. When a person decides to raise their arm, that mental decision does not cause the arm to rise. Rather, the decision is the occasion for God to cause the arm to rise. God constantly intervenes, coordinating mental and physical events, making it appear as though they interact when in fact each is caused directly by divine action. Similarly, when a physical event occurs, like a pin pricking the skin, this does not cause the sensation of pain. Rather, the physical event is the occasion for God to create the sensation of pain in the mind. This solution might seem elaborate, even desperate, appealing to constant miraculous intervention to solve a philosophical problem, but it reflects the seriousness of the difficulty. If mind and body really are as different as Cartesian dualism claims, then their interaction does seem to require something extraordinary, something that goes beyond natural causation. The occasionalists were willing to accept this implication, concluding that all causation is ultimately divine, that created substances do not really cause anything, that God is the only true cause of everything that happens. Another attempt to address the interaction problem was developed by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz through his doctrine of pre-established harmony. Leibniz compared mind and body to two clocks that have been perfectly synchronized at the moment of creation. The clocks run independently, each according to its own internal mechanism, never causally affecting each other. But because they were set in perfect correspondence from the beginning, they always display the same time. Similarly, mental events and physical events do not causally interact. Each series of events unfolds according to its own internal principles, but God has established a perfect harmony between them, coordinating them so precisely that they always correspond. When a mental decision to raise an arm occurs, the physical movement of the arm also occurs, not because the decision caused the movement, but because the mental and physical series have been harmonized to run in parallel. This view has a certain elegance, and it avoids the need for constant divine intervention. God sets up the harmony at creation, and thereafter the mental and physical series unfold in parallel without further miraculous coordination. But it still faces questions. How exactly did God establish this harmony? And does it really make sense to say that mental events and physical events correspond so perfectly, yet never causally interact? Our experience strongly suggests that mental events cause physical events and vice versa. Denying this causal interaction, even while preserving perfect correspondence, seems to go against the evidence of our experience. A more radical solution to the mind-body problem was proposed by Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza argued that there is only one substance, which he identified with God or nature. This single substance has infinitely many attributes, but we know it through two of them: thought and extension. What we call mind and body, or mental events and physical events, are not two different substances, or even two different things. They are rather two different attributes of the same underlying reality, two different ways of conceiving or understanding the same substance. Every mode of substance can be understood either under the attribute of thought or under the attribute of extension. A human being is a mode of the one substance, conceivable either as a mind under the attribute of thought or as a body under the attribute of extension. This means that mental and physical descriptions are two different ways of describing the same thing. When a person decides to raise their arm and the arm rises, there are not two events, a mental decision and a physical movement, that need to be causally related. There is one event, one modification of the one substance, which can be described either mentally or physically. The appearance of interaction between mind and body is really just the correlation between two different ways of describing the same underlying reality. This is sometimes called neutral monism or double aspect theory. It avoids the interaction problem by denying that there are two different things that need to interact. Spinoza's view has influenced many later philosophers, though its identification of God with nature and its deterministic implications were controversial in his own time and remain debated. But the basic insight that mental and physical might be two aspects of one underlying reality, rather than two separate substances, has continued to attract philosophical interest. It suggests that the mind-body problem might arise from a mistaken metaphysical assumption, the assumption that mental and physical phenomena are fundamentally separate entities rather than different aspects of a unified reality. The rise of modern science, particularly the development of neuroscience in the 19th and 20th centuries, brought new perspectives to the mind-body problem. As scientists learned more about the nervous system and the brain, they discovered increasingly detailed correlations between mental phenomena and neural phenomena. Specific areas of the brain seem to be involved in specific mental functions. Damage to particular regions produced predictable deficits in perception, memory, language, emotion, or reasoning. Drugs that altered brain chemistry altered consciousness and mental states. Electrical stimulation of certain brain areas could trigger specific sensations or memories. All of this evidence pointed to an intimate relationship between mental processes and brain processes, a dependence of mind on brain that seemed undeniable. This scientific knowledge led many philosophers and scientists to embrace some form of physicalism or materialism, the view that mental phenomena are not separate from physical phenomena, but are rather constituted by or identical with physical phenomena, specifically brain processes. According to identity theory, a version of physicalism developed in the mid-20th century, mental states simply are brain states. When a person feels pain, this mental state is not caused by a brain state or correlated with a brain state. It is a brain state. The pain is identical to a certain pattern of neural activity. Mental properties are physical properties, specifically neurophysiological properties. This view has the advantage of according with scientific evidence while avoiding the interaction problem. If mental states are physical states, then there is no mystery about how they interact with other physical states. Physical states interact with physical states according to the laws of physics. Mental causation is just physical causation. When a decision causes a bodily movement, this is just one physical state causing another physical state, no different in principle from any other case of physical causation. The mental vocabulary we use to describe these states might be different from the physical vocabulary of neuroscience, but we are describing the same states, the same processes, the same events. But identity theory faces difficulties of its own. One concerns the multiple realizability of mental states. Mental states like pain or belief seem to be realizable in different physical systems. Humans feel pain, and presumably other mammals feel pain, even though their nervous systems differ in detail. If pain is identical to a specific type of neural process, then only creatures with exactly that type of neural process could feel pain. But this seems implausibly restrictive. It seems more plausible that what matters for pain is not the specific physical substrate, but the functional role, the way the state is caused by tissue damage and causes withdrawal behavior and aversive responses. If this is right, then pain cannot be simply identified with any particular physical state. This consideration led to the development of functionalism in the philosophy of mind. According to functionalism, mental states are defined by their functional role, by their causal relations to inputs, outputs, and other mental states, not by their intrinsic physical properties. Pain, for instance, is defined by its typical causes like bodily injury, its typical effects like withdrawal and distress, and its relations to other mental states like the desire to avoid the painful stimulus. What makes something pain is not what it is made of, but what it does, the functional role it plays in the overall system. Functionalism can accommodate multiple realizability. If mental states are functional states, then they can be realized in different physical substrates, as long as those substrates implement the right functional organization. Humans, aliens with silicon-based nervous systems, and potentially sophisticated robots could all feel pain if their internal organization realized the functional role characteristic of pain. This makes functionalism attractive to those interested in artificial intelligence and cognitive science, where the focus is often on information processing and computational organization, rather than on specific biological implementations. But functionalism also faces challenges. One concerns the qualitative character of conscious experience, what philosophers call qualia. Consider the subjective feel of seeing red or tasting chocolate or feeling pain. These experiences have a qualitative character a what-it-is-like aspect that seems to go beyond their functional role. Two states might play the same functional role, yet feel different qualitatively. This possibility is sometimes illustrated through thought experiments involving spectrum inversion or philosophical zombies. If we can conceive of beings that are functionally identical to conscious humans but lack qualitative experience, then this suggests that consciousness involves something more than functional organization. This brings us to what philosopher David Chalmers has called the hard problem of consciousness. Chalmers distinguishes between the easy problems and the hard problem. The easy problems, which are not actually easy, but are at least tractable in principle, involve explaining various cognitive functions. How does the brain discriminate between different stimuli? How does it integrate information from different sensory modalities? How does it control attention and guide behavior? How does it produce verbal reports about mental states? These are difficult scientific problems, but they seem like the kinds of problems that neuroscience and cognitive science can address through careful investigation and theory development. The hard problem is different. It is the problem of explaining why all this information, processing, and functional organization is accompanied by subjective experience. Why is there something it is like to be a human? Why does seeing red feel like something, rather than being just information processing in the dark? Even if we had a complete functional and neurophysiological account of visual processing, explaining how light of certain wavelengths is detected by photoreceptors, transmitted through neural pathways, and processed in various brain areas, it seems we would not yet have explained why this processing is accompanied by the subjective experience of seeing red. There seems to be an explanatory gap between physical or functional descriptions and the qualitative character of conscious experience. Some philosophers argue that this explanatory gap reflects a genuine metaphysical gap, that consciousness cannot be reduced to or explained by physical processes. This has led some to embrace property dualism. According to this view, there is only one kind of substance, physical substance, but this substance has two fundamentally different kinds of properties, physical properties and mental properties. Mental properties like consciousness and qualitative experience are not reducible to physical properties, cannot be explained in purely physical terms. They are emergent properties that arise from complex physical organization, but are nonetheless something genuinely new, not present in or predictable from the physical properties alone. Property dualism faces questions about mental causation. If mental properties are not reducible to physical properties, how do they affect physical processes? If physics is causally complete, if every physical event has a sufficient physical cause, then it seems mental properties can have no causal efficacy. They would be mere epiphenomena, byproducts of physical processes that have no causal influence on anything. But this seems wrong. Our mental states obviously do affect our behavior. Beliefs and desires influence actions. Sensations guide movements. If property dualism makes mental properties causally inert, this is a serious problem. Some contemporary philosophers have tried to navigate between reductive physicalism and property dualism through positions like biological naturalism, developed by John Searle. According to this view, consciousness is a biological phenomenon, as real and natural as digestion or photosynthesis, caused by and realized in brain processes. But consciousness is not reducible to lower-level neurophysiology in the way that temperature is reducible to molecular motion. Consciousness has a subjective, first-person ontology that cannot be fully captured in objective, third-person scientific descriptions. It is a higher-level feature of the brain, caused by and dependent on lower-level processes, but not eliminable or definable in terms of those processes alone. This view tries to take both scientific naturalism and the irreducibility of consciousness seriously. Consciousness is entirely natural and physical, not something supernatural or non-physical, but it is also irreducibly subjective, having features that cannot be translated into objective physical descriptions. The hope is to avoid both the mysteries of substance dualism and the apparent inability of reductive physicalism to account for subjective experience. Whether this middle way succeeds, whether it can be made fully coherent, remains a matter of philosophical debate. The mind-body problem has also been approached from perspectives outside the Western philosophical tradition. In Buddhist philosophy, the problem takes a different form, because Buddhism generally rejects the existence of a permanent, unchanging self or soul. What we call the mind is analyzed as a continuous stream of momentary mental events, arising and passing away according to causes and conditions. The body is similarly analyzed into component parts and processes. So the question becomes not how to relate two different substances, mind and body, but how to understand the causal relationships between different streams of physical and mental processes, all of which are impermanent and causally interdependent. The Abhidhamma tradition in Buddhism developed detailed classifications of mental and physical phenomena and theories about how they interact. But the framework is quite different from the substance dualism that has dominated much Western philosophy. There is no permanent soul or immaterial mind substance. There are only dharmas, momentary events or occurrences, some classified as mental and some as physical, all arising and ceasing according to dependent origination. The illusion of a permanent self arises from the continuity and causal connections among these momentary events, but there is no underlying substance to which mental and physical properties belong. Hindu philosophy, particularly in the Advaita Vedanta school, offers yet another perspective. According to Advaita, the ultimate reality is Brahman, pure consciousness or awareness, which is the ground of all existence. The apparent multiplicity of individual minds and bodies, the apparent distinction between mental and physical phenomena, these are ultimately illusory, products of ignorance or maya. The true self, Atman, is identical with Brahman, is pure consciousness. The mind-body problem, as formulated in Western philosophy, arises from a fundamental metaphysical error, the error of taking the phenomenal world of distinct entities and causal relations as ultimately real. Once this error is corrected through knowledge or realization, the problem dissolves. These alternative frameworks remind us that the categories and assumptions underlying the Western mind-body problem are not universal, that other philosophical traditions have developed different ways of thinking about consciousness, embodiment, and their relationship. This does not necessarily mean any particular view is correct, but it can broaden philosophical perspectives and help us see that the concepts we take for granted might not be the only possible ones. Contemporary neuroscience has made remarkable progress in understanding the brain and its relationship to mental phenomena. Functional neuroimaging allows researchers to observe which brain areas are active during different cognitive tasks. Studies of patients with brain damage have revealed how specific neural structures contribute to specific mental functions. Research on neural correlates of consciousness has identified brain processes that seem to be necessary for conscious experience. Work on neural plasticity has shown how experience shapes brain structure and function throughout life. All of this research has deepened our understanding of the physical basis of mental phenomena. Yet for all this progress, the hard problem remains. We can identify neural correlates of consciousness, brain states that regularly accompany specific conscious experiences. But correlation is not explanation. Why these neural processes are accompanied by subjective experience, why there is something it is like to undergo these processes, remains unclear. Some researchers are optimistic that further investigation will eventually explain consciousness in neural terms. Others think that the explanatory gap reflects a fundamental limit of physical science, that subjective experience cannot, in principle, be fully explained in objective physical terms. The question of animal consciousness illustrates some of these difficulties. We seem confident that mammals like dogs and cats are conscious, that they feel pain and pleasure, that there is something it is like to be them. But what about creatures with very different nervous systems? Do octopuses experience consciousness? They behave in sophisticated ways that suggest intelligence, but their nervous system is organized very differently from mammalian brains. Do insects experience anything? They respond to stimuli and exhibit complex behaviors, but their nervous systems are much simpler. At what point in the complexity of neural organization does consciousness arise? And is neural organization even the right criterion, or might consciousness depend on something else entirely? These questions have ethical implications. If we are uncertain whether certain creatures are conscious, how should this affect how we treat them? Should we err on the side of caution, assuming consciousness might be present even when we cannot be certain? Or is some degree of confidence about consciousness required before moral consideration is owed? The mind-body problem is not just an abstract metaphysical puzzle. It connects to practical questions about moral status, about which beings we should care about and why. The possibility of artificial consciousness raises similar issues. As computer systems become more sophisticated, processing information in increasingly complex ways, might they become conscious? Would a sufficiently advanced artificial intelligence be genuinely conscious, with subjective experiences and genuine understanding? Or would it merely simulate consciousness, processing information and producing appropriate outputs without any inner experience? If consciousness depends essentially on biological processes, as some philosophers argue, then artificial systems could never be truly conscious, regardless of their sophistication. But if consciousness is a matter of functional organization, as functionalists suggest, then artificial consciousness might be possible in principle. The medieval philosopher Thomas Aquinas attempted to integrate Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. Following Aristotle, Aquinas held that the soul is the form of the body, the principle that makes the body a living human being. But Aquinas also needed to preserve the Christian doctrine of personal immortality, the survival of the individual soul after bodily death. This created tensions in his system. How can the soul be both the inseparable form of the body and something capable of existing separately after death? Aquinas argued that the rational soul, while naturally united with the body, has some operations, specifically intellectual operations, that do not depend on bodily organs and therefore can continue after bodily death. But the separated soul is incomplete, which is why Christian doctrine includes belief in the resurrection of the body, the eventual reunification of soul and body. These theological concerns shaped how the mind-body problem was discussed in medieval and early modern philosophy. The requirement that the soul survive bodily death meant that the soul had to be something more than just the form or organization of the body. It had to be a substance capable, in principle, of separate existence. This pushed many Christian philosophers toward dualism, toward viewing the soul as an immaterial substance distinct from the body, even while they sought to explain how soul and body were united during earthly life. The development of neuroscience has not resolved the mind-body problem, but it has transformed how the problem is discussed. In Descartes' time, relatively little was known about the brain and its functions. Today, we know vastly more. We know which neurotransmitters are involved in different mental states, which neural pathways carry different kinds of information, how different brain regions communicate with each other, how neural activity gives rise to behavior. This knowledge makes it clear that mental phenomena depend intimately on brain function in ways that seem difficult to reconcile with substance dualism. Damage to the brain affects the mind. Changes in brain chemistry alter consciousness. Neural activity correlates closely with mental activity. All of this suggests that the mind is not a separate immaterial substance, but is somehow constituted by or emergent from brain processes. Yet the hard problem remains. Knowing that consciousness depends on the brain does not explain how brain processes give rise to conscious experience. We can map the neural correlates of seeing red, identify which visual areas are active, trace the processing of wavelength information through successive stages of visual processing. But this does not explain why these processes are accompanied by the subjective experience of redness, why there is something it is like to see red rather than these processes occurring in darkness without any accompanying experience. The explanatory gap between objective physical descriptions and subjective conscious experience persists, even as our knowledge of the brain expands. Some philosophers and scientists believe this gap will eventually be closed as our theories mature. Others think it reflects something fundamental about the nature of consciousness, something that cannot be captured in the third-person objective vocabulary of physical science. Still, others suggest that the gap might be bridged through new conceptual frameworks that transcend the traditional categories of mental and physical, subjective and objective. The mind-body problem remains active in contemporary philosophy, generating ongoing research and debate, new theories and arguments, refinement of old positions and development of new ones. The problem touches on fundamental questions about the nature of reality and our place in it. Are we purely physical beings, complex biological machines whose mental life is nothing's and over and above neural activity? Or are we something more, beings with an immaterial dimension that cannot be reduced to physical processes? Does consciousness reveal that reality includes more than physics can capture? That nature has both physical and mental aspects that are equally fundamental? Or is consciousness itself ultimately explicable in physical terms, with the apparent mystery resulting only from limitations in our current understanding? These questions about the mind-body relationship are also questions about what kind of world we inhabit and what kind of beings we are. The mystery persists across centuries and philosophical traditions. From Aristotle's unified living substance through Cartesian dualism and occasionalism and Spinozistic monism, through modern physicalism and functionalism and property dualism, through Buddhist analysis of momentary dharmas and Vedantic identification of self with pure consciousness, philosophers have offered many different accounts of how mind relates to body, how consciousness fits into nature, how subjective experience connects with objective reality. Each account captures certain insights while facing certain difficulties. Each illuminates some aspects of the phenomenon while leaving others in shadow. Perhaps the persistence of the problem tells us something important. Perhaps it shows that we are trying to understand something genuinely difficult, something that resists easy categorization and simple explanation. The relationship between mind and body, between consciousness and matter, may be one of those deep features of reality that we can approach from many angles, understand in partial ways, but never fully grasp or completely explain. The problem may be, in some sense, a permanent feature of philosophical inquiry, not because philosophers are confused or because they lack information, but because consciousness itself is something genuinely mysterious, something that reveals limitations in our conceptual frameworks and our modes of understanding. The mind-body problem continues to matter. It connects to questions about personal identity, about free will, about the nature of knowledge, about ethics and moral status. It shapes how we think about ourselves and others, about artificial intelligence and animal consciousness, about brain science and mental health. It reminds us that despite all our scientific and philosophical progress, some fundamental questions about our own nature remain open, remain mysterious, remain worthy of continued reflection and investigation. The problem endures not as a failure of philosophy, but as a testament to the depth and difficulty of understanding consciousness and its place in nature.